With me on the program this morning to discuss that someone is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, and also the Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer, Ed Husic. Gentlemen, good morning. Josh,
morning.
For years the major parties have outspent all comers in election campaigns. What's wrong with someone with the resources, returning fire, as Clive Palmer's done?
Well, look, Clive Palmer is, as the Prime Minister is saying, is trying to buy an extra seat in the Senate. But it's more than just the money that he's spending. It's the fact that he can't be relied on to abolish the carbon tax and the mining tax. He's abstained himself from key votes in the House. Only the coalition can deliver for the Western Australian people what they really need, and that's getting rid of the carbon tax and getting rid of the mining tax. You see, last year alone, Kieran, Western Australia was effectively paid a bill of $626 million on the carbon tax, and it's got to go. It's just got to go, and we're finding out today that Bill Shorten not only has plans to keep the carbon tax, but he wants to hike the carbon tax.
Garbage. But I'll ask you that question again. We'll go back to Ed for his reaction to it, but the point I make is you say that he wants to buy a seat in Parliament. Haven't the major parties spent far more than everyone else for years? And is it not a bit of a pot calling the kettle black here?
Well, here you have an independent, effectively, with a few dollars in the bank, trying to put himself forward to win seats right across the country. We're not exactly sure what Clive Palmer stands for. Both the Coalition and the Labor Party have been around a very long time. They have a key philosophy. They have a number of policies that they've put in consecutive elections. You can't compare the status of the major parties to that of Clive Palmer.
Ed Husic, I guess that there's a unity ticket at least on that.
I just think, I can't believe that the Liberal Party that took out the vacuum cleaner and soaked up every fundraising dollar across the country leading up into the last federal election is now complaining that someone else is spending big in an election campaign, and the party in the Liberal Party that put forward these big spending promises that people really severely question, for example, paid parental leave $5 billion, and now the Liberal Party is pointing fingers and the Coalition is pointing fingers at others at big spending campaigns. I mean, the hypocrisy is breathtaking.
So you think Palmer's well within his rights to be spending what he is, and even if he does end up, buying a seat in the Parliament?
People get very uncomfortable about seeing big dollars splashed around in election campaigns, wondering where the money's been raised, how it's been raised, and what commitments have been tied to that as a result. So I think the general public rightly is concerned about big spending campaigns, but I just reckon it is the height of hypocrisy for the Liberal Party that, as I said before, had spent up big at the last election, now to be trying to point fingers at Clive Palmer and bullying him into voting the way that they want.
Hypocrisy, Josh? Josh Frydenberg, what do you say to that?
He's speechless. There you go. That's it. Enough.
There's no hypocrisy whatsoever. The key message here is look what Clive Palmer stands for, look at his policies, look at his positions, and then look at the coalitions. And when it comes to delivering for the people of Western Australia, only the Coalition can deliver the abolition of the mining tax and the carbon tax. That's what this election is to be fought on. That's why we won 3 Senate seats last time round, and that's why I'm very confident that will happen again.
Well, let's go to Ed Husic on the mining tax and the carbon tax. Can Labor be viable in WA, or at least competitive, when you're still standing by the position not to allow the government to repeal those taxes, which you must concede have gone down awfully in WA?
But the opposition, or the coalition I should say, geez, old habits die hard. The coalition, I have to say, if they want to be fair dinkum in this election, stop hiding the Commission of Audit report. And what we're having is selective leaking of what that report means in the lead up to the WA Senate election. They've done it deliberately to hide all the bad news and then dump it on people after the votes have been cast. In terms of the carbon tax, for example, we had a policy we took to the federal election, which is that, you know, we believe that we have to do something about climate change. We were happy to repeal the carbon tax, but ensure that an emissions trading scheme was in place. We have to do something fair dinkum on reducing emissions. The other side of politics talks about that they're committed to it as well, but on so many levels they say something to get them out of trouble and then do nothing or the opposite in terms of actually reacting to the issues at hand, and it's not good enough.
Josh Frydenberg, on the prospect of repealing the carbon tax and the mining tax, you've said only the coalition can do it, but you can only do it with the support of the crossbench. Palmer's already got a couple of senators in the upper house. You're having a crack at him today. Tony Abbott had a go at him yesterday. Is it really the way to smooth over the minor party when you're going to need him as of July 1?
This is not about smoothing over the relationships. This is actually being very upfront with the Western Australian people and saying that we have a clear policy to get rid of the carbon tax and the mining tax. You don't see the coalition abstaining on key votes. That's what Clive Palmer has done. Look, it's a much surer bet to vote for the coalition because we can deliver those policies, we hope, after July 1 in the Senate. But the issue for the Labor Party is we're just finding out now with Mark Butler's comments that Bill Shorten has a secret plan. And that secret plan is to lift the carbon tax even further. Well, hang on, Ed. You can laugh about it, but it's not very funny for the families and for the small businesses and for the people of Western Australia. You see, the carbon tax is going above $25 from July. It's going to go up to $38 on Labor's own modelling. And, you know, we've seen now Mark Butler say that he wants to lift the target to 15%. This is going to cost the Western Australian people billions and billions of dollars. If we get rid of that carbon tax, we'll save the average family $550.
Let's get Ed's response. And Ed, on top of those points that Josh made, there's the other point that as of July 1, that the tax is meant to be applied to transport as well. So there's a whole heap of other sectors that will be impacted too. So the resonance of their argument, you would think, will only increase over the coming months.
On so many levels, this government's got to get cracking when it comes to emissions reduction. There's a target of reducing emissions by 5% by 2020. They're dithering on this so-called direct action plan. There has been very little move from this government in actually cutting back emissions. They're very good at basically holding up the boogeyman and trying to scare people about what's happening, but they're very slow on reducing emissions. You know, Josh has mentioned a number of times this garbage argument about, you know, Mark Butler reflecting on the fact that the Climate Change Authority has talked about the need for cutting emissions further. He's only reflected on that. That does not represent our policy. We'll release our policy in good time. But what this government's got to do is get on with the job of reducing emissions. Direct action is simply a subsidy for polluters, and it will not do the heavy lifting that needs to be done to ensure that industry is emitting less and that we can deal with the type of things that the IPCC released this week that indicated that climate change will affect Australia badly and we have to be prepared.
Do you think did Mark Butler say that Labor should be heading in the direction of 15% target as of 2020? Because it certainly sounded like it.
No, I didn't hear that, and I mean there are other people that have said that if this government doesn't act, for example, John Hewson has been in the papers this week saying that the longer it takes to get moving on this government forces a heavier load on the entire Australian economy in trying to deal with emissions reductions targets. You can't, as he said the other day, expect to reduce emissions in 2049 if you've got a 2050 target, for instance. So, you know, in terms of the coalition itself, it is dragging the chain. Direct action will not reduce emissions in the way that they predict, and it is simply a way to pay
polluters
instead of making polluters pay to clean up on emissions.
All right, let's finally,
Kieran,
Josh, any final thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, I just want to say, Kieran, you've heard it here first. Ed Husick has joined Bill Shorten in distancing himself from Mark Butler. to compare Mark Butler, the shadow environment spokesman, with Dr. Hewson, who's been out of politics for more than a decade. I mean, that's as far of a stretch I've ever heard. Look, the point here is,
well, you should listen to
Labor
yourself
gave us
on this
all
show.
this debt. They gave us the carbon tax that they promised would never happen, and now they want to hike it, which are additional costs for the people of Western Australia.
Stop politicking, Josh. Get on with the job. Emissions change is going to take a long time, and you guys are simply dithering.
Gentlemen, before we move on, why don't we take a quick break? We'll be right back with Ed Husick and Josh Frydenberg. Stay with us here on AM Agenda.